Hello and welcome, everyone. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all. Thank you for joining us in today's Demystifying Academic Impact Metrics presentation. We hope that you and your families are all safe and continue to remain safe in light of the challenging times that we are all facing. It is hard to remember a time when we could meet face-to-face to deliver these training sessions. When we delivered training sessions at universities across Africa, we found a need for more training on research metrics. Since we cannot meet face-to-face for the moment, we are endeavoring to service this need through today's presentation. I have the pleasure of introducing our presenters for today, Lucia Scumbi and Dr. Yehia Issa, who are both consultants working with Elsevier's Research Intelligence product portfolio. They are responsible for the experience of Elsevier's customer base spanning all of Africa. The presenters are specialists in both Scopus and Cybele and the practical use of these products in research. Before we begin the presentation, a little bit of housekeeping. All participants are currently muted. If you have a question, we encourage you to submit your questions in the Q&A box. We will be sharing a recording of this presentation as well as the presentation slides. This session is to help build your knowledge around research metrics. There is no certificate for this webinar. We apologize in advance if there was any misunderstanding or miscommunication about the certificates. We have consultants moderating the question and answer box live, so please do submit your questions throughout the session. And with that, let us begin. I will now hand you over to Lucia Scumbi to begin her presentation of today.
Good morning, everyone. Right, just to give you an overview of what we're going to discuss today. So we've divided it into different parts, and we'll start off with a bit of background about academic metrics, and then we'll go on to how does Scopus and Cybele support academic impact evaluation, and what metrics can you find within Scopus and Cybele. At the same time, we'll also give you a short introduction into Scopus and Cybele for those of you who don't have experience working with those databases and solutions. And then we'll end off with talking a little bit about the responsible use of metrics. Right, so it's good to start with a bit of a definition of what it is that we mean by academic impact. So in this cartoon here, you can see this is quite a cynical view of a researcher's quest for impact. But in essence, what it boils down to is one thing, and that is recognition. So in the academic context, impact and recognition generally means two things. It means that your research findings were accepted for publications and that they were vetted by experts in the field. So they've gone through a peer-reviewed process. Those experts also found that your research is of a standard high enough to be published. So that is the first impact that you really can see as a researcher. And then secondly, that your research has been acknowledged or it's been endorsed by means of having been cited or referenced by other researchers. In research evaluation, this is commonly referred to as academic or scholarly impact. And it's necessary to make a distinction here between academic impact and societal impact, because those are often confused with each other. So academic impact is a contribution towards advancing a scientific field in terms of theory, application, or knowledge to that specific research field. And what we mean by societal impact of research is when you're having an effect or a change or benefit to the economy or the society, culture, public policy, or services, etc. So the two are not mutually exclusive, but in terms of talking about metrics, we want to be very clear that at the moment in this webinar, we're going to focus on academic impact. The latter definition, where we talk about societal impact, which is also often called research impact. It's a very prevailing form used in the US, European countries, Australia, and so on. But there are currently no specific quantitative metrics for that kind of impact. It usually relies on narrative reporting. So here we're focusing on the definition I mentioned about academic impact. So the use of research metrics in this process of looking at what is academic impact is relatively recent phenomenon. And it dates back to the 1960s when the first citation index was created. It was built on the idea that through a citation an author can link his work to prior work, which makes it a very powerful way of finding relevant information on a topic. But by the 1970s, when indexing became automated, Eugene Garfield, that was responsible for the development of this database, proposed that counting the citations to work was equally powerful because the number of citations represents the recognition that a researcher or a journal receives. And then from this was born the journal citation reports, started with journal impact factor and so on. But before this, research evaluation and measuring the impact of research was done by peer review. So experts had to scrutinize your work, which was and sometimes is seen as the gold standard for research assessment. But increasingly metrics are being applied as an alternative to peer review or in combination with peer review. And why is this important? Because national and institutional research policies want to look at what is the impact that an organization has. They want to increase the research impact of a specific, of a country. And it's also used, so to be able to do that, you really need to measure it. It's also used, impact measurement is also used in terms of supporting promotions. How do you justify the work that you have done? It's also used in recruitment, for performance evaluation, for rewarding researchers for their work, when grants are awarded at an individual research level. So compared to peer review, bibliometrics and these kinds of metrics really have numerous advantages because it facilitates the process on different ways. So metrics are generally regarded as being objective. They're easy to calculate. It's a very fast way of looking at what a researcher has done over time. It's also accessible and it's easy to understand. Mostly the way that it's been calculated, the methodologies, these are relatively simple and they are available. You can find the definitions for them. And it's also cost effective, of course, because if you have to rely only on peer review when you're doing a very large assessment of a university, for example, getting so many reviewers together is a very expensive exercise. So there's a lot of advantages in terms of using numerical measures, metrics, to articulate impact, not only of researchers, but also on an organization level and also on a country level. So what are the building blocks here? So building blocks of measuring impact, academic impact, relies on publication counts. So mostly journal articles, books, book chapters, conference proceedings. So a physical representation of the work that you have researched. And then citations is basically the biggest building block there. So a citation is a reference to a published or an unpublished source, and they serve as an expression of value, worth, or impact. And when you look at citation analysis, that is then measuring the impact of an author or a publication by counting the number of times that an author's work has been cited. Supplementary to these metrics that are on publications and citations, we also use usage metrics. So how many times work has been downloaded. We also look at economic indicators and societal interests. So we measure downloads, views, mentions in social media, patents, etc. And we'll show you some of these metrics as well. So where do these metrics come from? And there are mainly three big, comprehensive, multidisciplinary citation databases where we extract citation information, right? And those are Scopus, Web of Science, and Google Scholar. We're going to focus today on Scopus, of course, but just to give you the bigger picture of where these metrics might be coming from. And when you're using the metrics, it's important to also cite the source that you are using. So in terms of Scopus, and I'll give you some more information about Scopus, but Scopus generally it indexes more than 24,000 journal titles. All those titles are peer-reviewed. It goes through a selection process and it contains cited references from 1970. So all of the data that we extract from Scopus, these are validated high quality journals. Web of Science also, it's a fewer number of journals. They're also peer reviewed. They also go through a selection process. Cited references go back to the 1900s. And these are the two main databases that contain validated information that has been published. Then Google Scholar is also often used as a citation database, but strictly speaking, it is not a citation database. It is a search engine which also provides information about citations. But the information that is contained in Google Scholar has indiscriminate content. So the content does not go through a selection process. We actually don't know what is the requirements, what is the selection that they make, how they make the selection of the journals that are indexed, or if you want to call it indexing within Google Scholar. So when you use Google Scholar to try to measure the impact of an entity, you're going to find a lot of duplication of publication. So your data accuracy there is a bit compromised, right? But I just want to, there's another database, there's another service that has started recently. It's called Dimensions, started in 2018. It also covers a lot of academic information, but it's very new, so I'm not going to go into those. But just to give you that broad picture, this is where citation information comes from when we measure impact. So before we proceed into the, it is important to take note of the factors that influence publication activity. So when you're measuring impact, there's a lot of influences there that you have to take into consideration. So on the subject level, so each subject area has a different citation culture, different publication culture. So measuring impact and comparing impact of researchers across subject areas is not advisable at all unless you are using normalized metrics, and we'll talk about that. Another thing that influences the measurement of impact is the author's lifespan, publication lifespan. As you can imagine, it is not fair to compare a researcher that has been publishing only for a few years with a researcher that has been publishing for a long time. So the observation period is also important because it takes time for publications to be cited. So you need to keep that into consideration. You can't measure the impact of a researcher and take into consideration the publications that were published yesterday or in this year. It needs time to be cited. And then also the data source. So as I mentioned, the big data sources that are used for measurement of research impact, each of them are covering a different set of publications. So with Scopus, we are trying to, and I'll show you also, it's multidisciplinary, it's geographically also very representative, but that plays a very big role as well. Right, so very importantly, as I mentioned, then to take all of this into consideration, very important to normalize the metrics where it's necessary. So looking at the disciplines, how they differ from each other. So this gives you an indication of how the fields have different cultures in their way of publication. So academic fields such as neurosciences, life sciences, chemical engineering, they tend to publish a lot more than researchers, for example, in the social sciences, arts and humanities, mathematics also. The length of their reference lists vary a lot, so you would see very much fewer references in social sciences, for example, and then there's also variation in the number of co-authors. So just to show you that really each of these subject areas are very unique in the way that the researchers work within them and how they publish. So this is important to keep into consideration. So this is an example here between two researchers, for example. So they have more or less the same numbers, citations per publication. They have the field-weighted citation impact, and the scholarly output of these researchers are very similar. But if you look at the field-weighted citation impact, so when we have normalized that number of citations that the researcher has received, you will see that the researcher in the yellow here, because we are using a normalized metric, has a higher field-weighted citation, even though his publications must have been, is probably much fewer than the one that is publishing in psychology and neurosciences. Another factor that also influences publication is the type of publication. So you can see on this slide here, if you look at the review, all the different types of publications are listed here, from abstract reports, articles, books, etc. You can see that review articles really get overall, they get the highest number of citations. So this is another factor to keep in mind when we calculate or when we use impact metrics. I mentioned also before that it is important to keep into consideration the citation window. So it takes time for a publication to be cited. So you can see on this graph here, so the orange line indicates, from the date of publication until when you start seeing citations, it's quite a long period. But if you look at the number of downloads, so the downloads start very quickly. So often we also use download information to indicate what the impact is of the researcher. But important to understand all these variables that have an effect on research impact. So we said that we would try to demystify academic impact metrics for you, and one of the ways that you can do that is by differentiating what it is that you are measuring. So in this classification that is on the screen has this in mind. So firstly, keep in mind, if it is whether it is a researcher that you are trying to show the impact for. So metrics associated with a specific researcher are usually publication counts, citation counts, and the H index. So that says something about the researcher's profile as an entity. And then secondly, we have a group of metrics that tell us something about a journal. So that is how many citations, how many publications, and how many citations can be linked to that particular journal. And that would be an expression of the impact of the journal. And then we also have article level metrics. And those metrics, like a citation count, like the number of downloads, and numerous other metrics that we use as well, that show societal interest. So tweeting, any social media, news media, mass media, we can also capture those, and those give us information on an article level. So this is not absolute, but it does give you some way of differentiating when you are confronted with a whole lot of impact metrics. What is it that I'm trying to measure? So the H index would say something about the researcher, but it does not necessarily say something about, you know, the specific article. So there's a way to be able to just make a differentiation, a broad differentiation, when you're looking at the research metrics. Okay. So we're going to, so that is basically some of the background that I wanted to show you, just to give you an introduction in when we're talking about academic impact, what is it exactly that we're talking about, and what are some of the pitfalls that we need to look out for. We're going to use Scopus and Cybele now to give you an idea of how you can use Scopus and Cybele to get to these metrics and to understand the metrics. So in this part, I'm just going to give you a very quick recap on what is Scopus. So Scopus is a global multidisciplinary citation impact index, and it is supports researchers and research officers to discover academic literature, to analyze search results, but also to find journals, and then measuring research performance, which includes research impact. Scopus is one of the largest information databases available, and it is regarded as the most comprehensive database of peer-reviewed literature. It contains almost 80 million items, and most of these items are scientific articles, which have been published by more than 24,000 journals from 5,000 publishers, of which Elsevier is one of the publishers. So the content from Elsevier represents about 10% in Scopus. Because of the unique way in which the references and the authors and the affiliations are linked together, it is able not only to find sources on material, but also on author profiles, profiles of institutions, and profiles of journals. Because of the size of this, it is then possible for Scopus to get, through Scopus, to get that global overview of scientific literature, which is then representative of global impact, and can be used as a very strong measure of research impact. So it does not include every single publication that is published in the world, but it is regarded as representative enough, and it is used by the ranking organizations also in that way, as being representative. So this slide, just very quickly to give you an overview of the representativeness of Scopus. I mentioned before that impact measurement is influenced by the source data, and therefore it's important to know what is included in Scopus. So when you're using Scopus impact metrics, that you understand where is it coming from. So firstly, there are different content types. So article journals, scientific journals, conferences, books, and book series. More than 9.1 million open access documents are included, more than 5,000 open access journals, where the entire journal is then open access, and it is multidisciplinary. So it's covering physical sciences, health sciences, social sciences, and life sciences. And it covers the entire world in terms of the geography of the world. Right. So at this point, I'm going to pause and give us an opportunity to get feedback from you, whether you are finding this information interesting and whether you can answer a question or two for us. Right. So thank you. Thank you very much for your input. There's some voting still going on. Thank you so much for your feedback here. Yeah, so I can see there's good understanding there in terms of the subject. Does subject area influence publication and citation counts? 99% of you voted yes, and 1% voted no. So the answer is definitely yes, it has a very big impact. There's still some voting on how many journals does Scopus cover? 14,000, 40,000, or 24,000? Okay, so the majority of the participants here are saying that there are 24,000 journals that are covered in Scopus, which is correct. Smaller numbers are saying 40,000 and 14,000. The correct answer is 24,000. So it's just more than 24,000. Okay, so with that, I'm going to end the poll. Thank you so much for participating. And at the same time, then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Yahya Essa, and he's going to talk about how to use Scopus to get information about author level impact metrics.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucia. Good afternoon or good morning, everybody. I'm Yahya Issa, and today I'll be covering some information about author level metrics, document level metrics, and topic level metrics. And then Lucia will continue with the journal level metrics and the responsible use of metrics. Most of the explanations are available in the slides, which will be shared with you after the presentation, after the webinar of today. But from my side, I'll be running it as a live demo. But in any case, you'll have both the slides and the recording, so you can follow either method if you wish. So if I may share my screen now. If we start by the author level metrics, so we'll do a simple search on Scopus on how we can search for the profile of an author by their name. So let me, in this case, go to my browser view. And here, of course, for all of you who have Scopus subscriptions, this is the homepage of Scopus when you log into your account. And in this case, under authors here, we can search for an author by their names. So let's use the same example as in the slides. So we'll use Dr. Anthony Fauci. And he is the only author appearing in our search results. If we click on him. So here's an overview of their profile. Of course, in this webinar, we are mainly focusing on the author level metrics. So the first metric we have is the scholarly output of the author. How many documents has this author published, which are in sources indexed in Scopus? So this is a metric signifying the productivity of the researcher. But of course, as Lucia said, we always need to use metrics responsibly. Before saying whether this is a good or bad number for an author, we always need to keep in mind how many years has this author been active, what subject area is he or she working on, and so on. So these are questions you always need to ask yourself before indicating whether the value of a metric is good or bad for the entity you are evaluating. So here we have the scholarly output. We have the total number of citations, which is another metric. How many citations the documents of this author has received. So in this case, we're in the 110, almost 112,000 citations received for his 1,160 documents. And we have the H index. The H index is a really important metric, especially when it comes to researcher levels. It's a metric which is measuring both the productivity of the author or the researcher in terms of number of publications and the impact in terms of how many citations they are receiving. And you can always click on view the H graph to go into more details on how it's actually computed. So on an author level, to compute the H index, they basically just sort the documents of the author by the number of citations from the highest to the lowest. So in this case, the first document, the highest cited document has 196 citations, the second one has 194, and so on. And then they plot them here by document number versus the number of citations. And then the y equals x line, or their intersection with the y equals x line right here, is where the star is 174, which is the H index of this researcher. So that means that this researcher, that 174 documents for this researcher each has at least 174 citations. So this is a technical definition maybe for the H index, and it's widely used to evaluate researchers, but I will go back and say that we always need to use it responsibly, because the H index will vary between disciplines, and it's not time sensitive. So it's not fair to compare two researchers by their H index if they have not been active for the same number of years as researchers, or if they are in different subject areas. So it's really important to use it, but to use it responsibly. So those are some of the metrics on the author level which we can easily find on Scopus. Now, if we do have access to Cybele, we can view and have more insights and more metrics on the author level on Cybele. So in this case, I'll just click on Export Profile to Cybele. And then if I go here under the Overview module to open this author profile on Cybele. So here, of course, in the case of Cybele, we are looking at the author for a defined time period. This is why the numbers will be a little bit different from what we've seen on Scopus, because Scopus is for the whole lifetime of the researcher. But in this case, let's select the last 6 years without 2020. So if we go for 2014 until 2019, we see that the same author, Dr. Anthony Fauci, he has 103 publications. So this is one metric, the scholarly output during this time period. What's the field-weighted citation impact of those 103 outputs? So this is another metric. You have the field-weighted citation impact, which is measuring not only the citations received by his work, but how they compare with similar documents. So the field-weighted citation impact is a metric which is normalized by subject area, by age of the document, and by type of the document. So in this case, when we have a field-weighted citation impact for an article is 1, it means that this article is receiving citations as would be expected for documents of the same age, type, and subject area. If it's above 1, then it's receiving citations more than would be expected, and if it's less than 1, then it's receiving citations less than would be expected. So when we say that Dr. Anthony's field-weighted citation impact is almost 10, it means that in average, his 103 publications are receiving citations almost 9 times more than would be expected. Then we have another metric, is the citation count, how many citations these 103 documents have received. Another metric we have is the citation per publication. So it's basically we're normalizing the citation count by the number of outputs, the scholarly output. We have of course the H index, which we explained, and we have the H5 index. So the H5 index is in fact the H index during the past 5 years. As I mentioned, the H index is not time sensitive, so it would be not fair to compare the H index of, let's say, an established full professor versus a new assistant professor. But maybe the H5 index could give us better insights on comparisons between different levels if they have both been active during the past 5 years. So the H5 index is the H index during the past 5 years. All these metrics are available on the Research Metrics Guidebook, which you can simply download here on Cybele, which is a PDF document giving an explanation about all these metrics if you want to go into further details. And I've seen a question in the poll about the G index and the M index. So those in fact are also author level metrics. Maybe I do not want to complicate matters for the attendees, but in general, the M index is basically your H index per year since the first year you started publishing, whereas the G index will give a higher weighting to the publications with more citations. And their explanations are all there in the research metrics guide. Some other author level metrics which we can find out from Cybele include for example, the outputs and top citation percentiles. What's the fraction, or what's the percentage of your scholarly outputs which are in the top 10% most cited worldwide? How many of your publications are in the top 10% of journals by their CiteScore percentile? How many of your publications have some sort of international collaboration in them? And what's the fraction of your publications which have academic corporate collaboration, which means an author from academia and an author from a corporate or the industry? So all these are author level metrics which we can use to evaluate or assess the impact of an author in this case. But as we said, we should always use all of these metrics responsibly. We need to bear in mind the time period we are using. If we are comparing two entities, in this case, if we are comparing authors together, we need to ensure that we are either comparing with time independent and normalized metrics, or we need to ensure that we are comparing within a similar sample size, as in similar profiles, as in researchers working in similar subject areas, working for the almost the same amount of years and so on, in order to have fair comparisons. So this is a quick overview about the author level metrics and how we can find them on both Scopus and Cybele. Now, if I move on to the document level metrics, so I'll start again here on Scopus. So of course, under the Scopus profile of Dr. Anthony, we will have the full list of documents which he has published in sources indexed in Scopus since he started publishing. And if we open any one of them, here is the profile of an article on Scopus. And what are some of the metrics we can find out here on Scopus? Of course, we can find out the citations. How many citations is this document receiving from other documents in Scopus, available in Scopus? What's the field-weighted citation impact of this article? So, as I said, this is a really important metric. It's an article level metric. And this case, 4.15 means that in average, this article is receiving almost 3 times more citations compared to articles of the same age. So articles published in 2019 of the same type. So in this case, it's a research article, not a review article or a conference proceedings or a book chapter, and the same subject area. And as Lucia mentioned, of course, we go beyond the citations, beyond the impact of the citations, and we have the Promix Metrics, which gives us other insights, as in the usage, how many views this article has received, how many people clicked on it, the captures, how many people have read it, the mentions, how many times it was mentioned in blogs or in the news. And you also have social media likes and comments on Facebook, for example, and tweets on Twitter. So all those are very useful, and those are extremely useful for the new publications which have yet to receive a number of citations for them. But if, for example, an author can see that an article or their own article is being read a lot, is being viewed a lot, is being mentioned in the media, people are tweeting about it, sharing it on Facebook, so maybe this will give the author or authors an idea that their work might be useful and will receive some citations in the future. And of course, you can click on View All Metrics to go into the full details about each of those metrics. For example, in the citations, you have them year on year. Of course, since this publication was published in 2019, we don't have any citations prior to 2019, but there are some other advanced features you can use, like, for example, you can exclude the self-citations if you wish to do so. Here's the field-weighted citation impact. Here are the Promix metrics, and if you click on see details. You can actually go into all the details about the Promix metrics for this specific article, who's tweeting about it, for example, which news media outlets it was mentioned in, who's blogging about it. So you can, in fact, go into much more details about the Promix metrics, which could be very useful, whether you are an author or if it's for a paper you are interested about. So this is an overview of the metrics, the article level metrics, and how you can view them on Scopus. If we go to Cybele, unfortunately on Cybele, the document is not an entity, but for any entity, for example, for an author or a country or an institute, or even a journal or a topic, you can view the full list of publications on. So in this case, I'll view the full list, the list of publications for the years 2014 to 2019 of our same author, Dr. Anthony. And if you click on export, for example, as an Excel file or a CSV file, here are several metrics which you can add to your Excel file when exporting it, which include, for example, the views, how many times this abstract has been viewed on Scopus, what's the field-weighted views impact. So this is very similar. It's anonymous to the field-weighted citation impact, but in terms of views. So what's the expected views versus what are the views you are receiving. Of course, you have the citations and the field-weighted citation impact. And you can go down even to more details about which topic this paper or this document was published in, and what's the topic prominence percentile. This was something we will get into right now. So this is an overview of the document level metrics, where we can retrieve them, view them on both Scopus and Cybele. And now this is something new, actually, which Lucia and I discussed and thought it would be interesting to add, and it's the topic level metrics. Defining a topic as a separate entity, and how we can evaluate this topic, and what are the metrics which are relevant to this topic. So on Scopus as well, so any document, you will find that under the abstract, you will have the Cybele topic prominence, which will tell you which topic is this document related to. And by topic, we mean a very niche topic addressing a specific research problem. So on Cybele, there are currently 96,000 research topics identified, and each new publication on Scopus will be attributed to one of those 96,000 research topics. So in this case, this document is attributed to this Cybele topic, which is identified by these three key phrases: enterovirus infections, and EVD68 infection. And then we have the topic prominence percentile, which is a measure telling us how much trending is this topic. Is the world interested in this topic at the moment or not? So it's a measure of the momentum of this topic. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's an important topic, but it's a measure about, is the world interested in this topic at the moment or not? So when we say that the topic is in the has a prominence percentile of 90, so it's in the 90th percentile, it means it's in the top 10% of hot topics worldwide. So in fact, in this case, the higher is the better. Why do we as researchers want to work on trending topics? Well, for several reasons, really. When I, as a researcher, I'm working on a topic which the world is interested in, then maybe I'll have a higher possibility of journals accepting my work, because we know, the editors know, the journal managing editors know that this is a topic the world is interested in. So of course, you'll have easier chances of publishing it. It will be easier to find reviewers for it because the world is interested for this topic. Of course, after you do publish it, maybe you have a higher probability of more readers reading your work, therefore a higher probability of receiving more citations, because you are working in a topic where the world is interested in. If you click on the topic here, it will give you some key phrases, analysis, top authors, and so on. But if we go about and see what other insights we can view about topics on Cybele, So if you have Cybele, then you can view this topic as an entity in Cybele. In this case, you'll have, of course, the metric of the scholarly output, how many publications are published on this topic year on year, what's the field-weighted citation impact, which is another metric right now, of these documents published in this topic. So in this case, there are 2 or 1 time above 100% above the world average. How many of them have international collaboration? How many times has their abstracts been viewed? How many times have they received citations? And of course, the topic prominence percentile, which we explained just a while ago. And there are other metrics which are based on the scholarly output, which can help researchers maybe plan for their research activities. So for example, if you go down here, you can find out who are the most active institutes worldwide in terms of their scholarly output during, of course, the selected time period. And this could maybe help us as researchers. If, for example, I'm looking for a institute to go do a postdoc and to collaborate with and so on. So who around the world is working on this topic? So here you can find that out in terms of scholarly output. You can do the same for the countries, and you can do the same for the authors. So for example, if you want to collaborate with someone, so you can check out what they've published, how many documents and what they have published within this specific topic. So this could help you maybe define your research strategy. And of course, who are the experts in this topic, who to follow to keep up to date on what's happening in this field. And as well, using the metric of the scholarly output for the Scopus sources, you can find out which journals are publishing more in this topic. And this could be maybe both a short list for the journals you want to approach, you want to try and publish in if you are working on this topic. And it's also a way to indicate which journals you should follow and read their documents if you are working on this document. So this is a quick overview about how to locate author level metrics on both Scopus and Cybele, the document level metrics on both Scopus and Cybele, and newly the topic level metrics on both Scopus and Cybele. As I said, everything here, the video will be shared with you. Also in the presentation, you'll find the slides explaining, having an explanation of what we've just went through. So I hope you find those useful. And of course, you can, if you have any questions, you can ask them now in the Q&A box. And now I will hand over back the mic to my colleague, Lucia, to proceed with the journal level metrics.
Thank you, Yahya. Right, so talking about journal metrics next, and to start with there, I thought just to talk a little bit about, what are journal metrics specifically. So it's a quantitative method to evaluate the quality of journals, and it is based on citation analysis. So the popularity of a journal is reflected by the number of citations related to the average journal in that article within that journal. And this is based on the premise, as we mentioned before, that a citation to a paper is a form of endorsement. So the number of citations which a particular paper then attracts is therefore regarded as an indication of the importance of that paper. Keep in mind that sometimes a paper can also be cited because you don't agree with a paper. So this is, you should keep in mind that this is not a relative, an absolute way to do that, but in general, when a publication is a citation, it is being endorsed. Various different methodologies and data sources, again, as we talked about right in the start when we talked about the background. So various different methodologies are used, and the data sources for journal metrics are different. So in this session going forward now, I'm going to focus on what we use in Scopus and Cybele specifically. And why is it important to know what is the quality of the journal, what is the impact of the journal? Because it helps us to select the best journals to read and also the best journals in which to publish. So this is what the metrics are trying to assist us with. Right. So within Scopus, we have 3 different journal metrics. It's the site score, the SNP, and the SJR, and I'm going to explain a little bit about them, but I'll also show you in Scopus where you can find these metrics and how to interpret them when you do use them within Scopus. So the site score metric is basically the methodology behind this metric is that it takes into account, it counts the number of citations that were received within a particular year, and it divides it by the number of documents that were published in the preceding 3 years. So the site score and any journal metric is calculated for a specific year. So in this little insert, you can see that the number of citations that were received for this particular journal year was 13,960, and the number of documents it received was 3,164. And so it basically gives you an average number of citations that journal articles receive over a 3-year period, right? So it's basically an average. But what's important, and what we mentioned several times today, is that you should really take into consideration the subject field of the journal. And that is why we have 2 additional journal metrics that we also make available in Scopus. And the one is the source normalized impact of paper, that's the SNP. And what the SNP does is it's based on the average number of citations the journal receives, and this and it's, sorry, I confused myself now. So the source normalized impact per paper basically also counts the number of citations, but then it divides it by what is the expected number of citations that specific subject area is going to receive, right? So in that sense, you get a normalized journal metric. The Schimago journal rank, it takes into consideration, it also counts the citation, but it weights where the citations are coming from. So it's saying that not all journals are equal. So if you receive journals from a higher ranking journal, that should count for more, so it's weighted for more. And if the subject areas of the journals, of the articles that are, the citing articles are more relevant or near to the subject area of the journal, that also counts for more. So in that way, it also normalizes for the differences in subject area. I'm going to go now into, before I go that, it's very important to mention the Doora Declaration, which is basically a principle that is advised by a number of researchers that have called for the end of the misuse of the journal of journal metrics. There was a tendency for some years now for researchers to use the journal impact factor and other journal metrics as an expression of their own impact. So all journal metrics, irrespective of where they come from, whether it's site score or SNP or SJR, or whether you're using the journal impact factor, those metrics are to be used only as a way of differentiating between journals and what the reputation is of the journal. So the Doora Declaration basically calls for it to be used as a measure of quantity, of the quality of the individual research articles, and not as a reflection of the quality or the impact of a specific researcher. So that is just the first responsible use of metrics that I wanted to mention, and I'll use, there are a few others that I will be also mentioning right at the end. So I'm just, I want to go to my browser and I'll share with you how can we use this within Scopus. Right. So this is on the Scopus homepage, and to find information and metrics about journal metrics, it is really throughout Scopus you can get access to that, but as a starting point, all the journals that are indexed in Scopus you can find under the Sources tab. So I'll go to the Sources tab. And when this module of Scopus opens, you can see that you can search for journals by subject, or you can search for journals by title. And irrespective, it is going to give you a set of metrics, and I'll explain those set of metrics. I'm going to use a subject area here, and you can either use the browse option by subject area, but you can also just type, I'm going to say biochemistry, biochem. So if I choose biochemistry here, I'm going to see a set of journals related to the subject area of biochemistry. So let me just narrow that down to a subdiscipline, biochemistry. Right. So in this list, you can see that a large number of journals are being listed. All of these journals are related to an area. It's a very large area, biochemistry, and you can see the metrics that are provided, say, for annual review of biochemistry. First, you can see the site score. So this is a very high-ranking journal. We know that because the site score, as we know, is calculated by the number of citations divided by the number of documents, and this gives you an average. So on average, the articles in this journal is cited 25.5 times in a 3-year period, which is extremely high. So we can also see what is the ranking of this journal. So this is the #1 ranking in the field of biochemistry, which contains 404 journals. We can see the raw data, the number of citations, the number of documents that were published, the percentage of documents published in this journal which have been cited. Right. So more information also provided on the source normalized impact per paper and about this Scimago journal rank, also information about the publisher. I'll go into more about this when we open for each journal that we index in Scopus. We have a journal profile page. And on this journal profile page, you will see more metrics about the journal specifically, right? So here it provides very transparently exactly how the site score is being calculated. So the average number of citations that publications receive in this journal. And then on the right-hand side, you can see right at the top here, you can also see all the metrics together. So this is the, if the subject area is not taken into consideration, the site score is 25.59. The SNP is where is 5.6. So keep in mind that the average of all publications is 1.0. The SNP average is 1.0. So this is an indication that this is high above the average. So we know that when we calculate this, the SNP is that we also take into consideration, so it is relative to the number of citations that the subject areas usually receive within that specific subject area would receive. And then if we look at the Scimago journal ramp, it's the number of citations received but weighted by the subject field and the quality of the citing journal. So if you look at the Scimago journal rank, it is also normalized, but if you take into consideration that the citations are coming from high-ranking journals that are very close to the subject area of this journal, then it has a higher Scimago journal rank, which shows that it is of a higher reputation. So this is how you would interpret the site score from the journal Scimago rank and the source normalized impact per paper. So further information is also provided about the journal metrics here. So you can go to the site score rank, which here gives you an indication of what is the rank of the journal within that subject area. And that also gives you then an indication of the percentile. So the percentile is linked to the rank of the journal. So this is amongst the 1% top journals within this subject area. Right. So there are more metrics here to discover, but these are, I would say, these are the most important ones, and that can help you to distinguish and understand what is the what is the particular reputation of a journal. So I want to go now to Cybele, because additional information is provided in Cybele, but I want to show a different example of a journal. So Cybele is a research performance analytical tool that is based on Scopus data, and it has different modules, and we're going to look at 2 modules that include more information. Basically 3 modules include more information about journal metrics. So we are in the overview module within Cybele now, and all the journals, all the Scopus sources, the titles that we cover in Cybele are also available in Scopus, are also available in Cybele. So in the entities panel, you can select Scopus sources, and then you can search for a journal that you want to find more information about. So lots of metrics are provided to give you insight into a particular journal. So I've selected one of the journals. So we looked in Scopus, we looked at one of the very, very high ranking journals. So let's just look at a normal journal, say Journal of Education for Teaching, and see what additional impact metrics are provided for this journal. So we are in the overview module, and you can see a repetition of the information you found in Scopus as a summary. So you can see the site score, you can see the SNP and the SJR. So once again here, if you're looking at this, if you compare, if you look at this journal in comparison, if it is, what is the expected number of citations for that specific, so this is education, what is the expected number of citations expected for education articles, then this journal is a little bit below average. But if you look at the Scimago journal rank, what this indicates is that if you consider where those citations are coming from, then the journal is actually a little bit higher than the world average, right? So looking at other metrics that are provided is also the field-weighted citation impact. So this also normalizes the publications in terms of the subject area, the type of document, and the time of publication. And you can see that the articles in this publication is 24% above the world average, because world average is 1.0. These and it provides additional information about the citations per publication, but keeping in mind now that we are looking at a specific time frame. Further information about this journal, it gives us information about the outputs in top citation percentile. So 5.7% of articles in this journal receive amongst the 10% most cited in the world. It also provides us information about the collaboration percentage of the articles in the journals. Right. Further, you can also gain more insight into this journal. This is not so much metrics related, but very important in terms of making a selection and making that decision about whether this is a relevant journal for you. Gives an indication of what are the prominent topics that are covered in this journal, and you can find more information about this on within the trends module, which gives you an overview of what are the most prominent key phrases that you will find. Right. So I want to stop here. I wanted to give you an overview. Your journal metrics are used very, very pervasively. It's important to understand that that you need to consider the subject area of the journals, not to compare across subject area, and that there's a large variety of metrics that can help you make a distinction between journal and really understand what is the reputation of journals. So I want to go, let me just go back to my slides again and talk a little bit about responsible use of metrics. Right. So we've talked already about the Doora Declaration. Sorry, let me just flip through a few. I forgot. We also said that we have a poll. So I want to, after now we've spoken about the journal metrics, let's just look at an interesting question about that. So I'm going to stop my share and then. So there are a few things that we should keep in mind when we are doing, when we do evaluation of researchers and when we are using metrics. So the first thing, and this is Elsevier guidelines, so metrics should complement and not replace human judgment. So when we're making decisions about researchers, about whether it's promotion, whether it's a grant application, etc., it should always be combined with a human judgment as well. Metrics should also be used together with peer review and expert opinion. The second guideline is to keep in mind that metrics embody human judgment. They are not independent of it. So when we are using metrics, it is something that has been provided. A citation comes from another researcher, so it's not completely separate. When metrics and peer review or expert opinion give different answers, it is important to probe further. And metrics does not only mean bibliometrics. So we've been looking at publication metrics, citation metrics, but metrics could also describe activities relating to funding, collaboration, commercialization, and other forms of impact. Multiple metrics used together give us the richest perspective. So this is something that is an absolute no-no when research metrics are used to make decisions about the performance of a research, is to use one single metric like the H-index. That is really not an acceptable practice. Always more than one metric and always combined with input from a human perspective, peer review, for example. Okay, so a few years ago, in 2015, there was considerable reaction to how research metrics are used, and the Leiden Manifesto was published in Nature, which gave us some guidelines in terms of what should be considered, especially when research metrics or academic metrics are applied by research officers or by such kinds of instruments that we have within university and within a state, for example. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but for those of you who are involved in doing these kinds of measurement of performance, these are some of the guidelines by the Leiden Manifesto. I'm just highlighting a few: measure performance against the research mission of the institution and the group of or researchers. So it is very important not to look at research performance and to use impact metrics in a vacuum. It should be in consideration with a specific mission. Protect excellence in local relevant research as well. So it is important not to only look at international publications, although that would give you a very strong global perspective of the impact of a researcher. But at the same time, it is important to also consider local relevancy. Allow those evaluated to verify data and analysis. This is very important. To always have the subject or the researcher that is being available the opportunity to make sure that the data that is being used, that it is accurate, and account for variation of, by field in publication and citation practices. And we really emphasize that today, and we hope this will be helpful for you going forward when you engage in using academic impact to do research evaluations. Right, so with that, I've reached the end of what I wanted to share. So maybe if there are some questions, we can still handle that. We have a few minutes.
There's a question about the Beals list. Could you explain a bit about the credibility of this list in your opinion?
Oh yes, so the Beals list was started a number of years ago when Beal was actually, he's a librarian. He worked in a university in the US, and he started noticing around the same time that open access publication became very popular, and he noticed that there are publishers that are taking advantage of this. So because open access publication is based on the fact that the author pays the article processing fees, and then the publication becomes available, freely accessible for anybody to read. So publishers saw that this is something that they could really misuse. So they take the article processing fees, but they don't really do any of the publishing and the editorial processes that go along with it. So he started publishing a list of all the publishers and all the journals that he thought were making, were taking advantage of researchers in this way. So subsequently, it was discovered that a very small percentage of the publishers that he listed was in fact not really predatory. The real definition of what is predatory is really a defrauding of researchers, so taking money from them and not really providing any services, not archiving the material or article and so on. So the Beals list is a very it's a good list to check whether or if you suspect that a journal might be predatory, and Beals list is regarded as a blacklist. And another school of thought is that you need to really consult a large number of these blacklists to be able to make a decision. So there's another school of thought that says, why don't we rather use whitelists? And a whitelist could be something like Scopus, which goes through which all the journals that are indexed go through a selection process, and we make sure that the journal is not predatory. And if a journal becomes predatory, that we have introduced measures to check our journals every year to make sure it goes through an algorithm and we test that the journals have not become predatory. And we also rely on feedback from our users to let us know that if they see a journal might be predatory or might just be not very ethical, to let us know, and we will investigate and we will remove those journals immediately. So I hope that gives some indication of, where the Beals list lies within the different ways of identifying whether a journal is predatory or not.
Yes, you did. And I have put the link in to register for our next webinar on identifying predatory journals on the chat, so people can copy that link. But if you also would like to find out or find the invites for the upcoming webinars that Elsevier is hosting, you can follow us on Elsevier Africa on Facebook or on Elsevier Community Group. This is where we post these invitations. A lot of questions in the chat box about where will the recording be available. The recording will be uploaded once it is ready on our YouTube channel, also called Elsevier Africa. The other question was, how different is ResearchGate, ORCID from Google Scholar and Scopus citations?
Do you want me to answer?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Right. So ResearchGate and ORCID. Was there another one? And then Scopus.
Yeah, and Google Scholar. In terms of citations, how different are they?
Right. So I think it's important to start with, where's the data coming from in these different systems. So let's start with Scopus. So in Scopus, the citations are coming from all the journals that are in Scopus. So when we calculate an H index or the number of citations, all of those citations are coming from journals that have been selected. They've gone through a process, a large number of requirements to really make sure that we have high quality journals in Scopus. So when you count those citations, the citations are also coming from high quality journals. So research, and I mentioned also that Google Scholar is not really a citation index. It's actually a search engine, which is then often used also as a citation database because it also keeps record of citations. But how the information comes into Google Scholar is by, it's by scraping different websites and putting all of this information together. So it doesn't make any distinction between the quality of the journals that they are listing and the quality of this, where the citations are coming from. So in terms of the volume, you're going to get higher volume of publications and higher volume of citations, but it is not going to be necessarily coming from academic journals that have gone through a peer review process, right? So that is a big distinction there. If you're looking at ResearchGate also they also rely on scraping websites and finding material that is available there, and also what researchers are uploading into ResearchGate. Right? So the citations are very much limited to the source of the journal, so the number of journals that they have access to, and the main differentiation would be that within Scopus, there's a quality control going on. We're making sure it's very academic, high standard, and within the others, it is beyond only academic material. So it could also be keynote addresses, it could be all different kinds of materials, and they would put all of those together and also calculate a citation number. ORCID is a little bit different. I'm not so familiar with ORCID citations, but ORCID is basically a system that provides you with a unique ID number for a researcher, but at the same time, it also allows you to create a profile for yourself. So you can upload all your publications into ORCID. You can even export your publications from Scopus into ORCID, and you can have them in your ORCID profile. But unfortunately, I'm not so clear about how they calculate the citations. Okay. So maybe I can also just mention that there's no problem. It is not, you know, it's not a problem to use these different sources for citations. The most important thing is to cite where the citations are coming from. So especially if you're using an H-index to say, this is my citation score in Google Scholar, my H-index in Google Scholar, or in ResearchGate, because it's the source, the foundation, you know, the source foundation that is really making the difference. And usually entities or bodies that are making decisions about research performance and looking at the impact are aware of the differences between how the citations are calculated within each of these sources. And if any of my colleagues would like to, you know, add anything to that, they're also welcome, of course.
Okay. We have another question based on Scopus versus Web of Science. Because Scopus has a larger number of journals, the question is, does this influence any of the journal metrics?
Yes, it does. It's a good question, but yes, it does. And it is basically the same as the previous. So the citations that are counted in the Web of Science are also for those publications that are indexed in the Web of Science, right? But there's one of the, if you're looking at site score, for example, and you compare that with impact factor, there's a slight methodological difference in how that is calculated. So are we talking about citations for just raw citations for a researcher, or how it's used for journals? I think just generally it is important to know that that it is also the number of journals are different, and the citations are calculated based on those journals that are indexed.
Okay. And last question, since we have just a minute left, if you could just explain that Scopus is not, a lot of people want to be, their research to be on Scopus, and are assuming that Scopus is a publisher's platform. If you could just explain how they could get their articles to appear in a search result on Scopus, what would they need to do?
Right, so yeah, that's a good question also, because the first thing is to know that Scopus is not a publisher. So Scopus does not publish the journals. It is an indexing service, and it is based on a number of journals. So and the importance of that, because Scopus is so widely used by more than 4,000 universities across the world, so it gives you a lot of visibility when you publish in journals that are indexed in Scopus. So to make a decision about where you publish is to use the Scopus source list, and from the Scopus source list, identify the most appropriate journals for you to publish in. And those journals are coming from many different publishers, more than 5,000 different publishers. So it is not a publishing house, it's an indexing service. So a good starting point is going to the Scopus source list and selecting a journal from the Scopus source list. Then you'll be sure that your article will also be indexed in Scopus and have that same chance of visibility.
Perfect. Okay, I think we've answered most, if not all, of the questions in the Q&A. So just to round up the webinar, just to mention, the link that I posted in the chat box was for this webinar, Avoiding Predatory Publishing Using Scopus and Cybele, which is on the 4th of June. And for the publishing questions that we received, we are going to also be hosting 2 publishing workshops on the 1st and 3rd of June. To all those who have requested for invites to these workshops, as I say, please follow Elsevier Africa on Facebook or the Elsevier community group. And for the recording of this webinar, it will be available on Elsevier Africa Elsevier Africa YouTube channel. So just to thank everybody for attending. Thank you to the presenters for the presentation, and wishing everyone a lovely day further.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.